Yes, you can do whatever you like. My, environmental. Yes.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. This is the first spring semester Food for Thought speaker series, and we're very honored to have with us here today Dr. Art Trese from the Department of Environmental and Plant Biology. My name is Teresa Moran, and I'm the Food Studies theme faculty leader. So we have a list of events. We also have a long list of courses that you can take if you're interested in the production, consumption, representation, and meaning of food. And if you'd like to be included on our mailing list, please put your email address at the back of the room with on the pads of paper. Following the presentation, we'll have a reception in the faculty lounge. And right now, I don't want to interfere with Mary Nally, who is the director of CFI, Community Food Initiatives, and her very important work. But I'm going to turn it over to Morgan Viss, the chair of the department, to introduce Art.
Well, it's my pleasure. I have to admit, I chuckled a bit when she asked me to introduce Art because I thought that Art should be universally known here on campus. Just a couple of things about Art. He teaches a class on sustainable agriculture in our department. He also teaches plant breeding and plant pathology and various other sorts of things. And he also teaches PBio 1000 plants and their environment. But he is a 3-time university professor, so that's why I thought that he really needs no introduction. I'm just going to let him tell you more about his topic.
So we're going to start with a skit this afternoon, as you might tell. So Mary, what you doing?
Hey Art, how's it going? I'm just shelling these bean pods here. These are the jade green beans.
Jade green beans. Well, how do you like them?
Delicious.
Delicious?
They're so fantastic, and they grow perfectly in my garden here. They do really well with the weather conditions.
Is this the first year you grew them?
Yeah, the first year they turned out great. I'm getting
So you were picking them and eating them and thought they were delicious?
Yeah, and so I saved
And then-
my last harvest
Okay.
of the beans so that I can, grow some more and sell them to some folks I know.
You're going to plant them in your garden and grow them again?
Yeah, that's my plan.
That's cool.
They turned out well the first time.
If you have
so I
more than
saved
you
them.
need in your garden, what were you going to do with the rest of them?
Oh, I was thinking of selling them.
You want to sell them
Yeah.
to
grow
somebody
them.
else?
Yeah, sure.
I think that's fair. Those are actually, it turns out, a variety that I produced last year.
Oh, yeah? Did you develop these?
I did. I'm glad you really like them,
They're great.
but I'm a little bit worried when you tell me you want to sell them. Because that's kind of what I was planning to do, was like produce them and sell them to customers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, really?
Oh.
So, you think that's fair if you sell them? Because it doesn't seem like you did any work to make them, but I spent like 10 years developing them. I feel like,
Developed this special strand since
I-
it works so well.
yeah,
Sounds
like,
so high.
yep, perfect, right? Really like them.
Well, what if I gave them away for free?
Seems like you're still like cutting into my customers. I was thinking about like everybody in town would be buying them, and I'd get some money back from them. And you want to give them away? I don't even like that idea actually when I think about it. I don't mind if you plant them in your garden because it seems like that's fair. You bought them from me,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah, I
and
just
you
want to
could.
be able to keep eating, and
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. So can we just make a deal like you can plant them, but you can't sell them?
I guess that's
You guess that's fair. What about you can't give them away either?
good. Give them away.
I'll just talk you into this.
Can I send people to you if they want to buy some?
Sure.
All right.
That sounds fair.
Fair enough.
But I'm a little uneasy about this sort of idea that just because you were growing them, and I guess I can see where it comes from. When I spent that much time producing them, breeding them, I feel like I should have some chance to control like who is selling them. I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking us through sort of essentially where we get to this conversation and what in the United States at least, what the sort of legal actual reality is. What are Mary's rights if she buys some seeds from anyone? What are her rights to grow them and produce them? What are the limitations on those rights? Are there things that she's not allowed to do? And does that apply for all the seeds that she buys or for only some of the seeds that she buys? And how is she expected to know the difference? So I'd like to talk to you today about where all of this begins and then how we end up with the legal system that we have. And then we'll eventually, at the very end, briefly talk about what half of you are probably here to talk about is Monsanto and the great evil that's happening to the world's seed production. But I want to begin with really how did we develop a legal strategy for providing both some compensation for people that develop new varieties, who invest their time and energy in coming up with new kinds of seeds, and the right of individuals who purchase plants to keep those plants and grow them, and maybe to share them, or maybe even to think about what if I could grow these in enough surplus that I could sell them. Is that sensible? Should I have that right? So thank you, Mary. We'll talk afterwards and see if we can really come down to an agreement on this. If we could have the lights down a little bit. So this is where I start, really. What is the balance between the people who develop, the breeders, the developers, the people who use their innovation, their knowledge to come up with something new? As you guys all know, we often talk about in America what really builds our economy is innovation, creativity, thinking of new and novel things. It's not using the same things that we had a generation ago and 5 generations ago. We like to think that we reward innovation and creativity and novelty and people always sort of challenging what we have and trying to make it better. So if we're going to reward innovation and development of new and better things, seems like there needs to be a strategy, an economic system that rewards that in some way. But at the same time, we want to balance that with people's rights. If you purchase something or if you're using something, to not say, well, it always has to go back to whoever developed it. There has to be some ability to buy something and then to make utility out of it on your own. So that's really where we are. And I'm going to try to sort of go through this, and especially to deal with how does patent law, which applies to almost all other innovation and discovery and new ideas, either it's patent law or it's copyright law that protects the intellectual property of people who create new things, can that be applied to plants? And can we do it in a way that seems to be fair and seems to balance those two sort of different competing ideas that people should be able to grow their own things and keep their own things and even share some of the things they grew, and the idea that we also want to reward people for innovation. So in the beginning, I wish I had a little like, da-da. In the beginning, there was what? However you want to look at it, at some point, Earth was rich in animals and plants that were here long before people started working to create them. So what we would say in sort of today's terminology, public domain, things that belong to everybody. Nobody could walk around and point to something and say, I created that, therefore it's my property, therefore if you want some of that, you have to pay me for it. So in the beginning, everything was public domain. Eventually, though, that begins to change in some ways, and I want to give you a little bit of a story about the founding of America. So our rules and regulations go back to the original founding and our Constitution, et cetera. And this is one of the characters that plays a big role in the sort of the mythology, at least, of plants and the importance of plants as Europeans came to America and spread on the frontier. Well, who is this guy? This is Johnny Appleseed, or John Chapman. What's he famous for doing? For Colton, what's he famous for?
Spreading apples.
Yeah, right. And is that a good thing? Like, was he celebrated for his generous running around spreading apple seeds everywhere? Oh, certainly, that's right. So the idea was, here's somebody who is going into the frontier and just, sort of sometimes our mythology is he was just running around giving apples to people. Like, you look like you need some apples. You look like you need some apples. And he was, to some degree, he was spreading apples into communities and areas where apples weren't already present. And so we sort of think of him running around, and he has a bag in his, and this is Johnny Appleseed out promoting that these apples belong to everybody, and I'll just give you some, and when they come up, you can give them to your neighbors. He wasn't expecting that he was going to plant every apple tree in America, but that he was starting a process of he would offer them, and then those people could offer them to someone else and to their children, and that apples would become an important part of the sort of food supply, et cetera. Was he out running around promoting heirloom apples? Just as a thought question. I see you shaking your head no. You didn't think so. Yes, because heirloom apples usually refers to a variety, some description. So you would have an heirloom that's the Baldwin or the heirloom that's a summer greening. But if you just have this, sorry, not this, or the previous slide, apples of every description, then we wouldn't call that heirloom apples. So it's true, heirloom apples have to be reproduced clonally. So if he were giving people grafted trees, you could say, well, that's what he was doing. He was spreading different kinds of heirloom apples and promoting different kinds of heirloom apples. And you might ask, well, who owns those heirloom apples? In reality, Johnny Appleseed wasn't promoting any particular kind of apple. He was, pretty egalitarian about it. All the apples that I collect, I take the seeds out, I throw them into a bag, I plant them, and whatever comes up is what we get. So this is really what he was doing. And again, this sort of public domain or open source idea that whatever's available is shared by everyone. No limits, no restrictions on who can grow it, where you can grow it, et cetera. I do want to point out that he wasn't some, Santa Claus just giving everybody gifts. What he was really doing was going to a community, fencing off a piece of property that he bought, planting apple seeds, and coming back every year. And as the apples started to grow, then he would start selling them. And he was making money by going into communities, creating apple nurseries, selling those plants. So he was, in reality, about monetizing apples, just a point of reference. Another important character in our history who's quite well known for his fascination with plants and gardens and new kinds of plants and innovation, and had an obsession with garden peas, apparently. He had in his garden 18 different varieties of garden peas and many varieties of all sorts of other things. Who can you think of in early American history who had this beautiful garden, and it's still maintained as a beautiful garden you can go visit? Yes, Thomas Jefferson, right, our third president. And that was another example of someone who said, I like innovation, and I think that America will grow and prosper if we come up with new plants and new kinds of agriculture and promote better ways of doing things, not just sort of accepting that we know something about agriculture, we're just going to leave it where it is, but that we need to work towards coming up with new kinds of plants and new kinds of hybrids, new kinds of agriculture, and that should be provided basically for free, again, as a sort of public domain. He wasn't thinking that if we develop something, we're going to hold on to it and sell it. But it's just that this will make everybody more prosperous if we promote this idea of, at least in plants and agriculture, including animals, that if you come up with something novel, you can offer it or you can sell it. But if somebody buys it, they can reproduce it and sell it as well. In the late 1700s, early 1800s, another thing that happened sort of coincidentally with Johnny Appleseed, Thomas Jefferson, and the essentially appearance of a brand new industry. And that industry is people making a living selling seeds to people over a large area. So prior to that, most seed exchanges would have happened in a very small community with your family, with your cousins, with maybe the people that live down the road. Or maybe in your community, there'd be some mechanism for exchanging seeds. If you ran out of cabbage seeds, you'd find somebody that had some. But because commerce was pretty localized, there wasn't very much spreading seeds over any great distance. But then we end up with the United States Postal Service. We end up with cheap printing, cheap color printing. And you can make a catalog, you can put that catalog in the mail and send it to somebody a long distance away. They can open it up, pull out an order sheet, fill it in, put some money in it, put an envelope, send it back to you. A week later, you're sending your seeds to them. And so you can build a business model around selling all kinds of seeds to people over a very large distance. And you're expecting to make money in this arrangement. You get the seeds from somebody. You either grow them yourself or you buy seeds from a farmer. You just simply describe them, promote them, and then market them. And this is how you start to make money as a seed business. Again, in this scenario, in the early 1800s, middle 1800s, there are no limits on who can do this and when you can do it. So basically, this is just a free-for-all. You have to trust the company you're buying seeds from. Right? You have to assume that when they describe something and they say this is what it is and it's 30 cents a packet, that if you send them 30 cents and you get that packet, that it actually is the seeds that they described and that it's going to provide for you whatever the value of that description was. You can buy those seeds from the company. If you like them, you can just save the seeds yourself. You can plant the seeds. You can give them to your neighbor. They become part of your community's seed collection if that's what you desire. So this is really where we are in the first 100 years of America. Then this character comes along, Luther Burbank. He is born in Indiana, from a family of 18. His father dies when he's 21. He buys a small farm and starts to do what he really wants to do with his life, which is make new varieties. He starts playing around with plants, really without using scientific method or Mendel's genetics. He just says, I think if I take this and I combine it with that, I might get something new. And of course, he comes up with many things that are new, but not particularly interesting or desirable. But throughout his lifetime, he comes up with over 800 brand new novel vegetables, flowers, trees, cacti, any number of things. So he goes on, moves to California eventually, and just becomes famous for always, every day pretty much, working on creating something new that he wants to put on the market, tell people about, and hopefully get some money for this, for his efforts, for his innovation, for his ability to create new things. But he's living in a time when there is no economic reward guaranteed to somebody who develops a new kind of plant or any kind of novelty in plant production. It's open source, it's public domain. So no matter how long and hard you work on something, when you sell it to somebody, they have every right to just make copies of it and turn around and sell it to their neighbors. So he's concerned about this. His whole idea about what he's doing and what others might do if he is successful to make new varieties, to improve the things that are out there, runs into a problem. He has this big catalog. It's full of all sorts of marvelous and wonderful things, he believes, that people will be willing to pay for. But how does he get them to pay him? How does he recover the cost of his time, so basically pay for his living making new plants and selling them, when there isn't any legal strategy that says that people have to buy them from him? He has no control over them. Once he sells the first one of these plum trees, I can buy one from Luther Burbank, I can make cuttings from it, I can clone it, I can make a whole orchard of 2,000 of these plants, and he gets nothing except for that one plant that he sold me. And I get all the benefit of all of his work and his new products because I'm selling these marvelous new plums. The solution turns out to be put together in part by a cooperation between Luther Burbank and his friend Thomas Edison. So Thomas Edison's well known in American history as the guy who was always patenting something. So while Luther Burbank's working on plant biology and thinking about new inventions and what can he do to extract some income from his new inventions, Thomas Edison's like, well, we have for things that I invent, real things, real ideas, not real, but physical things, there's a patent law which says if I apply for a patent and I'm granted a patent on something, then I'm the only one that can make it. Or I can allow someone else to manufacture it under a license agreement and I get royalties every time they make a copy of it. So he's kind of famous for saying he wanted to file a patent a week. That was his goal. If you can imagine thinking that you're smart enough that every week you've come up with something no one's ever thought of, you've already drawn it out, you've sketched why it's important, you mail it off to the patent office, and you sit back down at your desk and you're like, what am I going to do this week? So there was just a thing on TV about this automated pencil that eventually becomes the tattoo pen. But he was just running off these patents day and night. He also said his real goal in life was to have one world-changing patent every 6 months. So one a week. Some of them might be trivial, but he was ready to change the world with his idea that he was smart and other people were smart and he could come up with new and innovative things. And of course, in the early 1900s, the world is changing. Every day you turn around and somebody says, have you heard about this thing you pick up and you talk into it? Or have you heard about the thing you can listen to music, or that you can go and sit in a room and there's like this movie playing? It's like all of these things are happening and it's all patented. Luther Burbank was saying to his friend, like, none of this works for me. I can invent and invent and invent, but I don't have any way of actually getting any reward for my efforts. So the two of them lobby Congress, and Luther Burbank dies in 1926, but after his death, Congress does eventually pass the first law that relates to the sort of intellectual property rights of people who develop plants, and that's called the Plant Patent Act. And it is limited in scope. It really separates plant production into two things: plants that reproduce by seeds and plants that are not reproduced by seeds. And the Plant Patent Act allows someone who develops a cloned or grafted or something that's reproduced by cuttings or divisions, anything that's not reproduced by seeds, to actually apply for a patent. If the patent is granted, then they have exclusive rights to reproduce that. And again, like in any other thing, you can license the rights to reproduce that and to market it under some agreement between you and the producer on a royalty payment. So very simply, things that are not reproduced from seeds would be all of your fruit trees, all of your nut trees, or most of your nut trees, your apple trees, etc. Many of your garden flowers that are simply, you grow them and you divide them up in pieces. Lots of other things. It did also exclude bulbs. I'm sorry, not bulbs, tubers. Seeds and tubers are excluded. Seeds and tubers, it doesn't matter how new it is or novel it is. People are still allowed, under the Patent Act, to reproduce it as many times as they want, to reproduce it and sell it. All the things I was challenging Mary about, still legal at this point. It's only in things that are reproduced clonally. So let me give you a real quick example of how this works. So this is Marquette. It's a new variety of wine grape developed by the University of Minnesota. Brand new. They apply for patent protection. It's granted, and then they put it on the market. And they're saying this, la-di-da, this is why you would want this brand new kind of grape. What does it do? All sorts of things. What are they worried about? That is very easy for somebody to buy one of their grapevines, and when it grows, cut it up in pieces, put those pieces into a pot. Next thing you know is you've got a whole bunch of Marquette grapevines. You pay for one, and you get as many as you want. And so University of Minnesota is like, we really want some sort of protection. This is why they like the patent law, right? This is why everybody who is working to develop new varieties says we don't want somebody who just bought one grapevine and is now making $1,000 a year to sell them to consumers when we're trying to recoup the cost of it, all the work that we did to make all the crosses and develop this and test this, and finally say, okay, it's ready for release, and then find out we don't get anything back for this. So this is the specifics of it. So how do they monetize their release? So if you want to buy a Marquette grapevine and then multiply it in order to sell it, you do two things. You buy a license, $200 to the University of Minnesota. Once you have the license, you're allowed as a nursery to multiply these. But for every one you sell, you also have to pay the University of Minnesota 50 cents per plant. So you sell 1,000 plants, that's $500 in addition to your $200 license. If you are not a producer, as just a homeowner, you can buy a plant. And then if you want to say, oh, I really like it, I want to grow 10 more, you're also welcome to reproduce it at home. But because it's patented, you have to pay the 50-cent fee, essentially licensure fee, royalty to the University of Minnesota. Now, you might ask, how is the University of Minnesota really going to enforce this? And for them, that's not really their question. It's for them, if you understand this is a law and you're willing to sort of work within the law, this is what they're allowed to do, and this is the reason why. We want new varieties. We want people to invest time and energy into creating new varieties, and so we want there to be some compensation. What about daylilies? Would this work for daylilies? What would you guess? Okay, so how do we normally reproduce daylilies? Yeah, by tubers, right? By division. They're not reproduced by seeds. So if I take a daylily and I cross it with that daylily, and I plant the seeds and I look at all the things I planted and I find one that's like, wow, this is in my opinion, the best daylily ever. I can just grow it and divide it up and make many clonal copies of that. And then I can apply to patent that daylily. And in fact, people do this every day. This is a patent for a new kind of daylily, birch stele. The stele comes from Stella d'Oro, which was probably the best-selling daylily ever, but was never patented. So they took that daylily, took another daylily, made a cross, and in their description down here about this, what's novel about this daylily, mostly just that it's pretty, according to them. Patent is granted. Doesn't mean anybody's going to want to buy it, but it does give them the exclusive right to say we are the only people selling this, or I can license that to any nursery in the country. They can reproduce it, they can market it, but they will pay me some amount of agreed money to reproduce my product. So that's daylilies. More recently, we've seen a lot of patenting going on in apple production. So we have various organizations, mostly universities, working hard to breed different apples together. And every time they come up with a variety that they think has something really to offer the public, they patent it. And then they put it on the market. And if you want to plant an orchard of that variety, you have to purchase each of those trees And somewhere in that purchase agreement, money is going back to the people that developed that variety. This one, Honeycrisp, is the best-selling apple on the market in the last 5 years. It's a patented variety, and it came on the market. It was just everybody, apparent according to the apple industry, like this was the best-selling apple they've ever had. And so every orchardist was like, well, if I want to make money growing apples, I should get a hold of some Honeycrisp trees. So I'm going to have to buy it from a nursery, and that nursery is going to pay the developers. This is how the whole plant patent system works. If you want to know how many apples out there are patented, this is from a nursery. These are their Gala-like apple varieties that are for sale. You'll notice that every single one of them, registered or trademarked. These are all patented varieties. Now, the original Gala is not patented, but all of the ones derived from it are. And then we have down here in the Macintosh group, you'll notice a couple at the bottom are not patented. So they're open source. They're public domain apples. When you buy those from a nursery, you're not paying any royalty to the developer. And you can buy those. You can take them home. You can graft them yourself. You can make as many of those trees as you want. So they're not protected. But the other varieties, you can't reproduce them yourselves without paying a fee. Yep. I just threw this in for some laughs. You guys know what this is? Yeah. And I looked at their site, and they actually want you to pronounce it grapple. Seems ridiculous, but they say it's grapple. And a lot of people see this at the store and think, wow, did somebody actually cross apples and grapes together? That's really remarkable. I didn't think you could. No, Morgan says no. They just take apples and soak them in something like artificial grape juice and pull them out and then market it to parents like, this is what will get your kids to finally eat apples, that they taste like grapes. But anyway. I'm sure it is, yes. And on their website, they will tell you it's only things that are approved by the FDA. No toxic things. And it's all nutritious. La-di-da-di-da. All right, so moving on. We're back to what is allowed and what isn't, and going back to the idea of seeds. So you'll notice that the Plant Patent Act did not change the legal status of seeds. Seeds developed by me or by anybody else can be grown by anybody at any volume and sold to anybody. It's still a public domain, open market for seeds. Then a few things begin to happen in the middle of the 1900s, and the primary one is development of hybrid seeds. So hybrid seeds come along first in just one crop only, and that's corn. So scientists, Iowa and a few other places, start to figure out that there's a particular sequence of crosses that you can make in corn to develop what become known as hybrid seed corn. And as hybrid seed corn becomes more and more important to farmers, we have a whole new business that's entirely different than the business of I just buy seeds from a whole bunch of people and I write them up in a catalog and then I try to find buyers and I sell them. It's producing a very specific kind of seed to sell to a very specific market, corn growers. This is one of the things that happened early on. Most farmers were really reluctant to even consider going from saving their own corn seeds and planting it year after year to buying seeds from a company. And the companies started to create these things called corn clubs. This young man joined a corn club, and a corn club is young men who compete with each other, living on farms, to have the highest yield corn on 1 acre of land, planted to whatever seeds they choose. So they're encouraged to choose hybrid seeds. He had a crop of 209 bushels at a time when the average was around 50 bushels. This is actually the progenitor of the 4-H clubs. So corn clubs, and then there's other clubs, cow clubs, and they become altogether the 4-H clubs. The idea of young people will learn new ideas in agriculture long before their parents will like insist on, no, we don't do that. This is how we grow corn. It's like their idea was, well, get the teenagers to think about it, and maybe when they take over the farm, they'll plant hybrid seeds. So hybrid seeds really do eventually take over the corn market. They offer two things: tremendous uniformity. So look at this field, every single plant identical to every other plant, as compared to when you grow your own seed and save your seed, and every plant's a little bit different than everything else. So for the farmer, there's substantial benefit once they start thinking about, is this going to be better for me? And I want to emphasize that it's also a substantial benefit for the end user of corn. And we're seeing all of these things happen at the same time. We start to see a big market for corn oil, and then for corn starch and corn syrups and other products, corn specifically raised for its protein content in feed. And so one of the things the industry wants is they want specialized corn that's uniquely high in oil or uniquely high in starch or uniquely easy to process into this product or that product. And so the industry, the people that buy the corn, are asking the farmers to grow specific kinds of corn, and they want all of the corn in that field to be exactly high oil, or every plant to be high protein, or every plant to have some other attribute to it. So these two things go together to encourage farmers to transition from growing their traditional heirloom varieties and to start purchasing corn and planting corn on their acreage. And first in Iowa, between 1934 and 1940, essentially in 6 years, it goes from nobody's planting hybrid corn to everybody is. In Iowa and Wisconsin, Kentucky, as you can see, pretty rapidly in a period of about 15 years, heirloom corn, corn saved by farmers, virtually disappears and is replaced by corn produced by breeders in businesses that farmers buy every year. And you might think, well, what if those farmers decide one day, I don't really like this hybrid corn business so much, I'm going to go back to what I was doing. I'm going to save my seed. I don't have my grandfather's seed in the barn anymore. I stopped using that a few years ago, but now I'm thinking I'd like to try that again. I'm just going to save the seeds in my field that I harvest today, and I'm going to replant it. To make hybrid corn, one of the things quite unique about it is you take very different parents and cross them to produce your high-yield hybrid. So this is not the seeds that you're going to plant, but this would be the cob that you get from the hybrid when you cross that with that. So we're really taking this as a parent, that as a parent, producing seeds, and when I plant them, I get this. Every cob out of my field looks like that, very uniform. What if I take the seeds from that and instead of selling them, put them back in my field and grow them? And the answer is, you get this. So you get something that's in between some weird, Try to imagine any possible combination of that with this all scrambled together. And that's what you're going to find out if you're the farmer who says, I'm going to save some of my hybrid seed and replant it. And this is why people argue that once a corn farmer or other big farmer sort of moves into hybrid seed, that it's very hard to go back. This is not going to be marketable, right? If I want oil corn, I don't want this. If I want feed corn, I don't want that. I want specialized feed corn. This is essentially just junk as far as the market is concerned. It's not that I can't do it, and it turns out it's not that it's illegal. I bought something. I have every right to replant the seeds after I grow that. It's just that biologically and practically, economically, it doesn't really make any sense. So this is really what I wanted. This is what I want to grow. And now I find out the only way to get this is to go back every year and buy my hybrid seed from the company that I started buying it from. And people say, this locks farmers into a situation that seems unfair. They can't go back. And you could argue whether that's fair or isn't fair. It's simply what happened. As farmers voluntarily said, I will buy my hybrid seed. I see the value in it. It does lock you into a situation where you can't easily just say, well, I've changed my mind. I want to go back to something else, unless you can find some open pollinated heirloom corn on the market somewhere. But I also want to emphasize that at this point in hybrid seed development, there's no need for a change in the law. The companies that are making hybrid seeds realize that their investment is protected biologically, and that is that I can't buy this seed and then save it and get any value out of it. So regardless of whether the law says I have to or not, I'm going to go back to this company. I'm going to buy hybrid seed again next year and the year after, because there's really no other way I can do this. There's no value in me in trying to save my own seeds. Okay, so no intention, no need for a law. That NOAA's lobbying essentially for a law to protect the hybrid seed industry. Then hybrid seed starts to spread out into other crops. So let's look really quickly at peppers. You can make a hybrid pepper for a very simple goal, saying I want a big, red, juicy, sweet pepper. Right now what I have is a large but yellow pepper, and I also have a pepper variety that produces much smaller, nice, bright red fruit and tasty, but they're not very big. So if I cross these two, I may get lucky and get a plant that produces a nice, large red pepper, which at that point I would say, let me give it a name. Let me see if I can find a market for it. Convince people to buy this particular kind of pepper. One of the things we know about hybrid seeds, just like corn, if I decide that I bought one of those nice big red peppers, or I bought their seed and I grew nice big red peppers in my garden. I want to save some of those seeds. If I do and I put those seeds back in my garden, not necessarily as dramatically as with corn where you'll get anything and everything, I may get various different sized peppers and different shades of yellow and red. Now, it may be that that's fine with me. As a small gardener, I might be, it's kind of interesting. I like variety. They were all red, all the same size, boring. And that if I take those seeds and save them, actually I like what I get. Or my customers like to shop a basket full of various kinds of peppers. On the other hand, if I'm a larger scale farmer, I might say, this doesn't make sense to me. The best money I get is for consistent, large red peppers. I'm selling to Kroger's after all. And they all want to look exactly the same on their display. They don't want to display a mishmash of things. So depending on who you are, maybe it makes sense to you to save your seeds. And in this case, you could, and you may get some value out of it. Or maybe it doesn't make any sense to you. I want to just tell you a quick story about Johnny's. Johnny's is a company in Maine. And this is their little story about how they bred a brand new hybrid variety of what's called bull's horn pepper. And they had one seed that someone gave them in 1973, and they'd just been keeping that, and that's a Italian bull's horn pepper that flowers early, matures early, but creeps along the ground a bit. Its sort of architecture is spreading and not really very desirable. Peppers sit on the ground, they get rotten, etc. They also had a hybrid that they had purchased from Italy, and they had selfed that hybrid and kept it and pulled out the ones they didn't like, and they eventually got a true breeding, tall, but late flowering bull's horn pepper. Very delicious, beautiful to look at, but it matured late. So it wouldn't do very well in Maine or in other northern climates really as a marketable pepper. So they thought, well, we'll combine those two. If we cross those two, maybe we'll get a tall, early flowering, early maturing pepper plant that has everything we want. And they did that, and they submitted that to the All-American selection, and it won first prize for the best vegetable developed that year. And as soon as that happened, they were like, wow, I think we're going to be able to sell this. So let's go back in the garden. Let's make lots of these seeds. Let's put them in our catalog next year and describe it as the All-American selection winner for vegetables and see if we can make some money on the work that we've done and the attention we've paid to keeping all these peppers and trying to develop new varieties of peppers. It's important to realize in peppers that you have to hand pollinate each fruit. So this person's pollinating a pepper. This would be one of the parents. This would be a flower from the other parent. So you have to break that flower off, bring it with his anthers. You have to essentially make the sex happen between these two varieties of peppers. This will eventually produce a big red pepper from which the seeds you gather will be your Carmen hybrid seeds. So how do you justify all that extra work? Well, when you put your seeds on the market, you're going to want to charge enough money to say, yes, I can hire people to go in the field and do all these crosses and make a little extra money for the years of work we took to get here. So this is the price for Carmen hybrid seeds. 100 seeds, $12. 250 seeds, $21. Now, if you buy seeds a lot, and if you go through a catalog and you buy some of this and some of that, and you're looking at your bills like over $100 already, and then you get to the pepper page and you're like, crap, $21 just for some pepper seeds. Maybe 250, you don't need that many. But if you're a farmer and you're buying seeds, that seems like a lot of money. So they are asking a lot of money for it, right? And you'd be tempted to say, maybe I'll just buy a packet and then I'll save my seeds and plant them again myself. I can skip all of this. I can easily produce 1,000 seeds in my own garden. And that's worth $71 worth of savings. So why don't I do that? So this is where people who breed new varieties start to get a little bit antsy about, if I develop something and I sell it, can everybody just grow it themselves and give it away and share it? And even worse, can they come in and put it in their catalog and sell it without giving me any of the value that they're getting for this new variety? Quickly, by comparison, 250 seeds of a standard non-hybrid variety is $4. So we're talking $4, $5 versus $22. A big profit margin, cost margin, I suppose. But for Johnny's, this is why they do this, because they feel if they really have a great pepper, they can get their money back. I can legally save the seeds, it turns out. No limitation on what I do with those seeds when I buy Carmen pepper. If I plant them in my garden, I'm not going to get that perfect pepper plant. I'm going to get some variations, some combinations. I am allowed to go through those and pick the nicest, tallest, best looking pepper, save the seeds again, and replant those. So as far as my personal right to those seeds, once I buy them, There are no limits on how long and how many times I can reproduce them and reuse them. So maybe I'm willing to do that. Maybe I'm just going to buy the seeds next year. But at least in terms of legal strategy, the law says I'm still allowed to save those seeds and replant those seeds. And maybe I'm okay with all of that. The next question, though, if I'm allowed to do that, is what Mary and I were talking about, should I be allowed to sell them? If I can grow them, I can reproduce them easy enough, should I be able to say, well, I know that there's people around here who would love these peppers, and I can give them a pitch about why these are great peppers. Or if I'm at the farmer's market selling my peppers and somebody says, I really, really love these peppers. They're the best I've ever had. I could say, you want to buy a packet of seeds? Because I've got those for sale too. Should that be legal? Does that make sense to us? Here's just another extreme sort of example. If you look at some of the newest varieties that are on the market, this is a first generation hybrid tomato, 250 seeds, $50. So yes, they spent a lot of work developing, and yes, they're trying to earn some of that money back, get compensation for their efforts. And yes, it's tempting for me to think, do I really want to spend that much money on a new hybrid kind of tomato? But there's a lot of money in seed development. By comparison, this is a tomato, 250 seeds, $6. So $6, $50, all because of the nature of the hybrid development of that particular variety of seeds. And then one last one I want to talk about with seed development. It gets a little bit closer back to what Mary and I were talking at the beginning. In beans, you don't actually make a hybrid and then take the seeds and put them in a packet. You make some crosses, and you make many crosses, and in those pods you get seeds, and you look at all those seeds and you plant them out, and you go through there and you say, well, these are not interesting, but these three are really interesting. And you put those seeds in the ground, and you look at all of those, and you say, well, these I don't like, but these I do like. And you keep doing that until eventually you get a population that has characteristics unlike anything that you've seen before. And that would be any variety that you want. So I'm not making crosses. I really only had to make a couple of crosses. And then it's just years of selection. And when I get it down to the point that every time I plant them, they look like this, then I would say, okay, that's a brand new variety. I can describe what it does, what it tastes like, how it grows, what diseases it's resistant to. I can try to make a pitch that that variety has some value to you that's different than the value of any of the other seeds on the market or any seeds that have been around before. The question is, as I was saying to Mary, so if you buy those seeds from me, you know that if you plant them, you're going to get exactly what you started with. There isn't any question in this scenario about whether you're going to get a mixture of this or that. If you buy these seeds from me and you plant them, you're going to get exactly this next year and the year after and the year after. It doesn't mean I didn't put a lot of work into developing them. It just says in beans, where they're different about their biology and their reproduction, and all of the legumes actually, I'm not selling you a hybrid. I'm just selling you a variety that you could easily replicate in perfection just by putting it in your garden. And that again brings up that issue. How do I protect my intellectual property, my investment in that seed, if you can replicate it so easily? And what are the sort of limitations on what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do? So I'll give you an example. Here's my current favorite variety of beans is jade that we were shelling here in front of class today. Jade as a green bean is very straight, very marketable. It is produced high on the plant, very easy to pick. The pods don't lay on the ground. If they do touch the ground, normally they'll curve. It's not seen as sort of ideal in green beans. They're very tender, not stringy, la-di-da. I could go on and on about what's wonderful about jade. Or we could pick another variety that just has some novelty to it. It's like tell you why this is really a marvelous green bean that you don't have, you've never seen it. For whatever reason, sometimes a lot of it's just like, oh, I've never had one of those. My friends and neighbors don't have one of those. I want to be the first one to grow that. So whatever it is, I'm going to try and sell you this, and I'm going to try and make a living on it. So this is a long description of Fedco seeds that describes the jade bush bean and la-di-da about holding quality, tender pods, and all of that. Also a list of bacterial spot and common bean mosaic virus and a few other viruses, and it's resistant to diseases. So all of this is my promotion of this variety, why you should want to buy it to start with. And then down here is the pricing, right? For a pound, it's $10 a pound. That's the seed price for my new variety of jade. Turns out if I take an older variety, it's only $6. So this is not a new variety. This is something that's been around. And so a lot of people are selling this. I don't expect to really make any extra money on this. I'm really selling it just slightly above my cost. And so I'm selling this for $6 a pound. So is almost everybody else. But when we go back to jade, I'm willing to sell it. I'm willing to sell it at $10 a pound. Hopefully the difference is the amount of money I make for my effort in breeding it to begin with. So in 1970s, Congress passes a new law which addresses this concern of people who are working with seeds, who are saying, if I develop, if I innovate, if I put the money and time into developing new seeds, there is no legal protection for me. The status quo is anybody can buy those seeds, plant them, reproduce them, offer them for sale, sell them, whatever. I have no control over where those seeds go or how the money is spent on those seeds. So we have a new law put in place, and that's the Plant Variety Protection Act. And it does a partial sort of restriction on individuals' right when they buy seeds. And it only does this for seeds that have been applied for protection, so it doesn't do this across the board. Still, the vast majority of seeds are public domain seeds, and you can do whatever you want with them. But if I develop a variety like jade, I submit a description to the Plant Variety Protection Office. They look at that description and they say, yes, this looks like a novel, something unique that's not already on the market. We'll grant you Plant Variety Protection Act on it, protection. Then I can market it. I can say, when you buy this, you're allowed to grow it, but you're not allowed to sell it. So that's really the only distinction. I limit the number of people who are allowed to grow this and sell it. Not the number of people who are allowed to grow it and save it. That's sort of still maintained as a primary legal right of farmers and gardeners to always replant whatever seeds they buy. There is no limit in the United States that regulates your personal use of the seeds that you buy. If you're curious at all, there is actually in that law a little bit of detail that says if you buy one packet, you're allowed to save about one packet worth and replant it. It doesn't really say that you can buy one packet and grow 5 pounds and then plant a quarter acre and then save some of that and plant 100 acres. The details of the law really are intended to say if you buy it, you can keep using it at the level you paid for it. If you want to plant 100 acres, or the intention of the law is you should still come back to me and buy enough seeds to plant 100 acres, after which you can save those seeds and plant 100 acres every year if you want to. Anyway, so we have not restricted at this point any of the legal rights of homeowners or gardeners to save their own seeds. When you read that description, one of the things you might not have noticed right away, when you were looking through it, very little words, plant variety protected. And if you're aware of what that means, it simply means that you can grow this for your own use, but you are not allowed to sell it, you are not allowed to give it away, you are not allowed to trade it with somebody else. Basically, it belongs to me except for the amount that you bought, and that amount belongs to you. And again, that's how we get to $10 a pound, because I think this is a valuable new kind of plant. Now, it's also worth mentioning that patent protection in this case and in other cases is 19 years, and then the patent expires. And this will move into the public domain at that point. So I haven't protected it forever for, it's only for the 19 years of patent protection. So if you buy some and you're growing some, and then you notice that the 19 years of patent protection have expired, now you're allowed to grow it and sell it. You're allowed to grow it and trade it, so it becomes part of the public domain. But that 19-year window gives me a chance to recoup my costs and my investment in developing this to begin with. I threw this up here because I think you might just be amused, really. So this is a company, White Harvest Seed Company, that says they sell heirloom seeds, and they have all their heirloom seeds listed, including jade bush bean, which is a brand new variety, which is plant variety protected, and they're listing it under their heirloom seeds, which tells you two things, like don't ever believe what's on the internet, and secondly, heirloom has no legal definition. We talk a lot about the value or comparative value of heirloom seeds and these seeds. They haven't broken the law whatsoever to claim that jade bush is an heirloom because there is no definition of what heirloom means. It means whatever you want it to mean. And so it can be an heirloom if you say it is, or if I say it is. We can have an argument about it, but it doesn't matter how we argue about it because there isn't any law that defines heirloom seeds. So yeah, I thought it was pretty bizarre. They never mention on their website that it's plant variety protected, so you wouldn't really know. et cetera, as a consumer. But in the end, we find ourselves with individual gardeners or farmers can grow and reproduce their own seeds. They just can't become seed salesmen. And that seems to be a fair balance between the people who develop new seeds, the companies that want to sell them, and the people who want to buy them and use them. Remembering that the vast majority of seeds are still in the public domain. So it's a relatively small number of seeds that are at this level. They've been developed as recent varieties, and if you want to buy them, they're protected under this Plant Variety Protection Act. Most seeds are, in fact, under the public domain, and you can grow them, and legally, if you wanted to take the time to sell them, there's no restriction on your doing so. A couple of quick little looks at the details of the Plant Variety Protection Act. So this is just if you went there and asked these really specific questions. Does this mean the home gardener and farmer can't propagate the seeds and save it for future planting? It says no, that's perfectly legal. You can do that. That is not a restricted use of these seeds. This part down here is, so what are you prohibited from doing? And the answer is you're prohibited from selling, marketing, offering, delivering, consigning, exchanging, or exposing the variety for sale. So this really says you can't offer it to your friends. You can't trade seeds for a chicken. You can't do anything like that because those seeds that you're saving are fine as you're using them for your personal use on your property, but that's the limit of what you can do. Outside of that, those seeds really belong to the company that developed them or the breeder or whatever. This last part here is one more question that addresses the same thing with a slightly different addition to the answer, and that is, if you're somebody who's interested in developing new seeds, you can take one of these plant variety protected varieties and you can combine it in any way in your yard or in your business and come up with something new, and you can market that as a new plant variety protected. In the same way in patents, if you take a patented thing and take it apart and look at how it works and use that to develop some new device, that's perfectly legal. You don't have to pay the original patent owner. You have improved upon a patent. You can file that as a patent and you can market your product. Same is true for plant variety protected hybrids or any new variety. They're still available for everybody to work with and continue innovating and make better and newer varieties after that. So, and farmer and gardener's exemption to save the seeds all they want. How long is a new variety protected? It's 19 years. I think you know the analogy. The black-eyed peas, not the things you grow in your garden, but when 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was this ongoing debate about what is sort of the legal right of somebody who buys digital music and has the easy capacity of making multiple copies. How do we regulate the ownership rights, the copyright rights of artists who develop something, and then it becomes part of the digital domain? And what extent are you allowed to make copies for your personal use or copies to give to friends? Or even if you develop a website, could you be able to make copies and sell them on that website and to reap rewards from somebody else's music? You know, and the net result was exactly like it is the Plant Variety Protection Act. You are allowed to make copies for your personal use, but you're not allowed to make copies for commercial distribution or even technically to give them to your friends, to offer them on a website, even if you're not getting money for it. They belong essentially outside of the copy that you have in your possession. The rights to that belong to the artist. And the same thing is true for plants. So I want to just touch on, do we need to compensate people for breeding new varieties? Here's a very common, the number one the number one culinary herb is basil. There is a new disease that arrived 3 years ago that attacks basil, that is destroying our basil crop. And you might ask, so what are we going to do about it? And the only really long-term answer is we need somebody to take culinary basil, breed it with something, and develop a resistant varieties of basil. Well, who's going to do that? And who's going to spend that kind of time and effort if there isn't any money available to them in compensation for that, for the time and effort required? So I would say we want to have a law that rewards people for their effort and innovation, creation of new and better varieties. Otherwise, all we have is what we've got now. There's no incentive for people to develop new things. So we want to make sure that the system rewards those people. And now, finally, I do have a few words before I'm done about, not Darth Vader per se, but everybody's favorite multinational corporation. I'll give you a minute to look at that picture. So So what does Monsanto, how do they fit into this big picture of what's legal and what's not legal? And I'll put it very simply this way. Monsanto has seeds that they've patented. The law does not protect those seeds when they give them to a farmer. They don't protect the company from that farmer buying the seeds once and planting them again every year. So there is no legal restriction on farmers' rights to buy the seeds from a seed company and then replant them as long as they want to. For many things like hybrids, there's no real value in doing that. But for genetically engineered crops, and because of their added cost to the farmer, there's a tremendous incentive for farmers to say, I'll buy your genetically engineered crop, I'll plant it, but I'm just going to save some of my seeds and replant them every year. And for companies that have invested, in Monsanto's case, more than $100 million for the first genetically engineered seed they were selling, they're like, we can't run a business if we spend $100 million and we get nothing back. So we need to figure out a way that we can sell those seeds at their premium price year after year. And they came up with this, simply a legal document, a contract, which they asked farmers to sign this contract. If you want to buy Monsanto seeds, then you need to sign this contract. And this contract says you will not save and replant those seeds. Despite the fact that it's typically your right under the law, here you're giving up that right by signing a contract with Monsanto. And so if you're willing to do that, if that's what you want as a farmer, then you're agreeing to this arrangement. If you don't want to sign to that, if that contract makes you uneasy, then buy a public domain variety or from somebody else. And Monsanto is saying, we don't ever hold a gun to anybody's head. We don't ever tell a farmer, you must sign this. It's totally voluntary, and when a farmer signs it, then that's our obligation to sell the seed for an end use other than planting it. And because they signed this, they can't save the seed and replant it on their own farm. And that's essentially where we are. There's a lot of people, a lot of sentiment that says that Monsanto is trying to, somehow strangle the seed industry. They're trying to take farmers' rights away from them. Farmers are signing over their rights when they do this. They can go back to getting seed anytime they want and turn back to growing seeds from some other source or from open source, et cetera. There's no obligation to continue doing this year after year unless farmers want to. And that's essentially the reality of what's going on with that. I do want to click on one quick slide just to let you know. This one is that, remember that patent rights last for 19 years. This year, last year, summer of 2014, was the first time that patent rights expired on a genetically engineered crop, Roundup Ready soybeans. And this is the University of Arkansas, who's basically been working on their public release, public domain version of Roundup Ready soybeans, which are now on the market. So suddenly, we are really going to be faced with a question. This isn't really about Monsanto anymore. It's about, do farmers grow Roundup Ready or other genetically modified crops? Certainly, they're not paying the premium price anymore if you get it from here. So how do we regulate that? And are we happy with the fact that this now is a process and a technology in the public domain? We can't really point to a company anymore. I could be doing this. I won't, Brian, but I could go home and I could do some tinkering around and I could come up with, as long as I'm using off-patent, essentially open source technology, anybody, any breeder can make genetically engineered crops and put them on the market. We have to figure out who's going to regulate that going into the future, et cetera, but that's essentially where we are right now with genetically engineered seeds. And I know Mary wanted to make an announcement or sort of a pitch. And
So, Community Food Initiatives is a grassroots-based nonprofit organization here in Athens, Ohio. We serve the county and recently are expanding into the region. We are focused on local food security issues from seed to plate. And one of our programs that we've had for many years is creating a network of seed savers in this region, working with them every year to host local seed exchanges where people can come, meet local seed savers, and purchase, trade, or get for free locally produced varieties of seeds. And also we teach a lot of seed saving workshops. This year, we are piloting the Southeast Ohio Seed Savers Company. We are starting a micro-regional seed company. The seeds just went out to 3 retail locations. The pharmacy, White's Mill, and the Village Bakery will be retailing these. We have 21 varieties of different vegetables, herbs, and flowers that 2 of our local seed savers have been working very diligently with us on. And the intention is to make these more widely available, as well as to develop a stronger network between our local seed savers to make sure that we're addressing the legal issues, making sure that we have high quality germination rates, trueness to type, so that you're growing what you think you're getting, and to create a financial incentive for people to save seeds in our region. So we're really excited about that. And we have a meeting coming up in a few weeks. I'll put this up on the board too, but we also have little flyers in the back if you want to grab one. The Southeast Ohio Seed Savers will have a quarterly public meeting, so anyone interested in being part of this network or giving input, that meeting will be Tuesday, March 24th from 6 to 8 at AceNet, which is on Columbus Road. And then our seed exchanges are both on Saturdays from 1 to 3 after the farmers market. One will be the 21st of February, and then we'll have one later in the spring on March 28th. Again, we have information at the back of the room if you want to get involved. And we also did bring our Seed Saver Guide booklets if you want to learn how to save your own seeds. We have a basic step-by-step booklet that helps get that through. And I'd like to thank especially Susan Young and Kira Slepchenko. They are the seed savers that are donating the seeds for this pilot project. So, thanks.
Thank you very much, Mark and Mary. Art, would you like to take some questions?
How about a few minutes of questions? Yeah.
I have a question regarding what the laws are when it comes to genetically DNA-based patents. Because I've always heard rumors about corn pollen getting into heirloom sourced corn, and the farmers had to get rid of it or couldn't sell it. What's the true story behind that?
Let's see. I think it's sort of an ongoing issue. So there are cases where Monsanto has come in and cleaned up the contaminated, if it's in the field. I don't think that they've been willing to pay like a farmer who says, I went to sell it, it was tested, it failed the test. I don't think they're currently compensating farmers for that, but honestly, I'm a little uncertain about all the last couple of years worth of litigation around that. But certainly it has become a concern as certain consumers or end users are trying to label food as GMO free, which has a certain definition, it's a minimal amount of GMO contamination allowed if something gets in from pollen from another field. So yeah, it's challenging because it's really, we haven't ever had to address that before. So the sort of how the courts look at it is sort of still developing, I guess. It certainly could become a much bigger issue if it's not just largely Monsanto and other large seed companies, but if many seed companies and universities are selling these genetically engineered seeds, and people are just buying them, and who's responsible for that? Obviously, the university is not going to want to say, we are responsible for somebody's contamination of somebody else's stuff. So yeah, I think it is probably something we need to work out as quickly as possible because it's just going to expand as a problem. Yeah.
So, like, you showed that agreement with Monsanto. So why then is Monsanto donating seeds? Things that they do, are those seeds not under that legal agreement?
Yeah, really good question, Kara. So she's asking, especially in Haiti, Monsanto sent 500 tons or something. Yeah, I think it's 500 tons of seeds to Haiti after the earthquake, saying, oh, the people in Haiti must be in desperate need of seeds, especially our seeds. He shipped them down there in a gesture of humanitarian goodness. And you're asking, so were those farmers asked to sign a licensure of agreement? And my guess is no. My guess is they didn't anticipate that those farmers would actually be spraying Roundup on their plants, and that they were just trying to make a gesture of providing seeds. I don't even know how many of those seeds were genetically engineered, like what exact seeds they were sending. I'm sure some were, but I think they just didn't worry about Haiti not a place they're going to make any money, even if they make farmers sign licenses. So they just sort of surrendered their royalty rights and sent the seeds instead. Yeah.
Just making sure, but I've been like saving some seeds that I got some apples and some burgers. So I can't plant those.
I was just laughing because it's like, you know, they get I don't know, seed savers, 7 steps. I've been saving some seeds. I'm going to confess to the rest of the world. It's this thing I do. I don't really want you to know about it, but I have been. And yeah, you can save seeds from anything, and you can replant them yourself. So there is no restriction on that.
And I can eat them, or like I.
You can't take a clonal plant and make copies of it, but you can definitely take the seeds from that plant and replant them. So yeah, there's like this fundamental right to save seeds for your own purposes has not yet been restricted. Does that answer your question? What you were wondering? Yeah,
Can you sell the apples from, or the fruit?
certainly. Yep.
It's not
Yep.
the seeds.
Yep. And there's no restriction. Once you buy a certified plant, you can sell all of it. No money goes back. It's just when the plant is bought to start with. Yeah.
Thank you, Art, and I just want to say that we do have Art's Carmen pepper for your enjoyment, crafted into a roasted red pepper pesto with the faculty comments. So thank you very much.
Johnny's pepper.